the do's and the don'ts, and everything in between. I don't know. Is there anything in between do's and don'ts? I feel like that kind of covers everything.
Podcasting's the Wild West, so it seems like.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So, but yeah, if y'all have any questions for podcasting for Hayden, then you can drop those in the chat, and I'll be monitoring those and bring them in when it makes sense. But yeah, let's go. Oh, also, if y'all are watching the replay, say hey. I always like to see who's checking the replay later. I'm always almost always in the replay for different Facebook groups where I'm like, I can't do this at 2 p.m. I have to go pick up my kids. Yeah. So I'm like watching it later on. But, well, let's get started. Hayden, welcome to the show. I am very excited for you to be here. I'm excited to talk podcasting. It's like a fun new thing, even though as we're recording this, I've just started my 5th year of podcasting as of November. So it's like, it still feels new. Like I'm excited about it. Like, whenever you have like a new kind of like side thing that's not your main business, and it's just like, oh, I want to do this, and I have all these ideas for this. And it still feels new, even though it's technically not. But yeah, this would be fun to talk about podcasting. And I know a lot of the listeners are on that, I don't know, that edge of like, I want to start a podcast, but I also have no idea how to start.
Right.
So this will be really fun. But yeah, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here and talk podcasting. It was great meeting you at Heart Conference this year.
Yeah.
That conference in itself, like every year, I mean, I know they've only done 2, but every year so many things happen in my business just from that conference alone,
just the community that they foster through, Evie and Lindsay, for everyone who's listening, that if you don't know the Heart Conference, which the odds are you probably do, but yeah, the Evie and Lindsay, they foster such a great community that like I didn't know anyone who was going to be there until like maybe a week or 2 before that I found out that one of my friends, Ivan, was going to be there. And then we ended up rooming together. Oh yeah, Ivan's great. He's been on the show before. And that was the first time that we got to meet in person, was at the conference. So even though I only knew really Ivan walking into it, I immediately was just like so much community and everyone just very welcoming. So it's great.
It's a community. It's a community that has so much involvement. Like, it's not just active only on social media. Like they're truly involved in the business and then each other's lives. So they're a good lesson on fostering community.
Oh yeah. So, which is not an easy thing to do. It's not just like, hey, everyone, be nice to each other and hang out.
Right. But no, I'm excited that we got to connect there, and excited to be here and chat with you.
Yeah, I am too. And, before we get into podcasting and all that, I have these questions that I've been asking my guests lately. And I stole a lot of them from Stephen Colbert and like his Colbert questionnaire, and then added a few of my own. So I've got just a couple questions, because this is like how I get to know people really well and like identify with them. Like, what kind of fruit do you like, and that kind of stuff. So I've got 17 questions. You just pick 2. Where are these questions anyway? Here we go. You pick 2 numbers between 1 and 17, and I'll ask you these questions.
We'll do 4 and 13.
4 and 13. Okay. Number 4. Apples or oranges?
Green apples from the fridge. I love green apples a lot.
It's like that crisp, tart apple. Yeah.
It's literally one of my favorite fruit. Yeah. Probably my favorite fruit, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. A good apple is probably my favorite as well. Most of my lunches are just an apple or 2. but from the fridge.
Yeah.
I like that you added
Yeah.
that because a cold, crisp apple is so much better than just like sitting on the counter. I can't have that just by itself. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. And then number 13, what is the last song you listened to on repeat?
The last song I listened to on repeat is a song called Rock Bottom by a band called Lakeview. They're out of Florida. They're a I I'm a heavy metal guy. I've been into metal my whole life, and we could get into that later. But this band is a metal band that also writes. It's like a mixture of metal and mainstream country, and I don't really like country that much.
Okay. Uh-huh.
But like they marry the two with like really good songwriting. They work with some songwriters from some other big metal bands that I listen to. So just the way, me being a production nerd and a musician and a songwriter, the way they put everything together is very, even though it's mainstream ish, it's very unique, and it's a fresh flavor on things, and it's a really good song. So it's heavy.
Okay.
Doesn't have any screaming in it, if that's someone's like worried, but it's cool. It's a cool mix. So I've been listening to that band a lot. So yeah.
Okay, and what's the name of the band again, so I can check it out?
Lakeview.
Lakeview. Okay.
Yeah,
nice.
You might have to search like Lakeview, Florida band.
Okay.
But yeah, so they're kind of gaining some popularity, and it's cool to watch.
Very cool.
But yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that I like that kind of music. I was never big into like screamo metal. I like to be able to like, sing along.
Yeah.
At least a little bit, or like know the words. But yeah,
I love the whole range. So I like the ones with the scary sounds. I like the screaming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But
nice. But Lakeview sounds interesting with like that marrying metal and country together. Have you heard?
And it's like country. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Have you heard of the Mars Volta?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're
absolutely
okay. I figured they're pretty big, or at least they were like 10 or 15 years ago, and I loved them. How they like marry like the like those Latin beats in with rock and metal, and it's a good time. I don't know what they're saying most of the time because I don't speak Spanish, but
it's energetic. It brings energy. It brings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Awesome. Well, cool. Yeah, I feel like I know you even better now, Hayden. We connected on apples and metal music.
Apple and metal. That's funny.
Well,
sweet. I am.
Yeah, just apples and metal. Just listening to metal, eating my apples.
Absolutely.
Love it. Okay. So, for podcasting, you've got a lot of like do's and don'ts. You're a podcast producer, correct?
Yes. For several different shows, I've been I've been working in podcast management and production full time for about 5 years. So yeah, I'm lucky enough that I get to do it from home with a clientele base that allows me to do it full time and grow my company, and it's an exciting process. So it's been an exciting 5 years, and it's continuing to be exciting or stressful every single day.
Yeah. I would imagine. I mean, like, because I do all the podcasting, managing and stuff on my own, and that is stressful as itself. And I can only imagine managing multiple different podcasts from different time zones and countries, as we were talking about before we started recording.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, how did you get into podcast management and production?
Well, so when I was 19, I went to a trade school for audio engineering. So learning how to record music in a studio, produce music, edit it, all of that. And I ended up working at that studio and working at Apple also on the side for a few years. And then I continued to just do audio productions from home, recording bands, writing music. But it wasn't necessarily giving me like the business that I wanted. I didn't have the right business model. But one day I've loved podcasting for years. And so one day I was just listening to one of my favorite podcasts at the time. And I was like, man, it sounds so bad. Why does it sound so horrible? Like, it's just like do these guys like just not invest at all into like any kind of production? And so then I was like, wait, I make, really loud metal like sound coherent and like clear, and I mix music and I improve raw recording. So maybe I could transition to podcasting and make some podcasts sound good. So I just slowly started editing and just doing like production stuff for different shows. And then as it went on, they just started asking me like, hey, can you also do this? Can you also do this? Can you also do this? And I just slowly built up the skills of doing all the management, the hosting. The first time I got asked like, hey, can you do the hosting and everything for the show? I was like, yeah, absolutely. But I had no idea what it was doing.
You're like, I had no idea. I can figure it out.
Exactly. And so, I went from just being on the engineering side to trying to understand podcasting as an industry or a whole, all fronts of the business. So that's when the business started to grow and allow me to do it full time. Was when I kind of went from not being just editing per episode,
right,
which doesn't always give you the biggest return,
right,
because it's only worth so much. It just is. It's only worth so much. But no, yeah, it's been exciting, and I still record music and write music and everything. But that's more of something I enjoy as a hobby on the side, which was kind of always the goal, like to keep that part fun. And I love what I do with podcasting. So it's a cool mix to like have my hobby and my business kind of revolve around the same room, but it's not the same thing.
Right. Yeah. It's like sometimes you walk into the room going to work, and sometimes you walk into the room, it's like, this is for play. This is exactly. I get to make some music right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. So
that's very cool.
Yeah. So I just kind of transitioned from music to podcasting.
Nice. I love how you were just like, I was just listening to one of your favorite podcasts and like, this sounds terrible. I can help them. This is something I can do. If I'm like, it's just like, it's really cool whenever you see like a hole in the market or something like that, where it's just like, people need my help. This is something I can do. I'm going to go ahead and fill this. This is great.
Right. And it was before there were easier at home editing platforms and whatnot, Like it was a little bit before that. It was kind of like either you learned it or you hired someone. Like those were your only two options, really. So.
Oh yeah, I remember because I was like 2018 is whenever I really started thinking about starting a podcast, and it wasn't until 2019 that I did. And in 2018, I was like, I don't know, I've got like GarageBand or Audacity. Like these are my options of recording and editing, and I knew a little bit of GarageBand, which is where I started recording, which I would not recommend anyone go back and listen to the first like 20 episodes of this podcast. There's some good nuggets in there, but the audio recording quality is so terrible.
Hey, my first productions that I did, I didn't fully understand that at the time there was a loudness measurement for podcasts specifically. I was like, just like mastering of music. So like my first few podcasts that I did for like the first couple months were like so loud, which sounds cool, but it's not. Like they're like very loud. So yeah, no, that was a learning opportunity a few years ago. Well, more than a few, but yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I didn't know what peaking was or like anything like that. I'm like, if it's louder, that's better. Like people can turn down their earbuds if they need to. But
exactly.
yeah,
They won't
it
have
was
to turn it up as much. But
exactly, yeah. You can listen at half volume, and it won't scare anyone if it's going from a normal audio podcast
exactly
to mine.
dynamic.
Just yeah. Oh man. So I guess that's one of the don'ts of podcasting is don't just max out your volume whenever you're editing
Absolutely.
it. But let's start with some do's, because we're talking about do's and don'ts of podcasting. What is something that we should do in podcasting?
So one thing I think a lot of people don't do is actually invest in the equipment from the beginning, right? Like I consult with a lot of new shows. It's almost like a specialty of mine is helping people create the shows and launch them. And I hear so often like, well, once the show starts making money, I'll get better equipment.
Yeah.
And there's some merit to that, except we'll talk about the show making money later, but it's really like there's you don't have to come in with a $10,000 budget to start. You don't, but it helps to have a little bit, maybe more than $100 budget, right? If it's right, I suggest certain equipment that it's they're not $800 mics, but they're 250, and I know that's a lot, but the quality and what it will do down the road for the end product is just it's unbeatable, right? Like it makes a huge difference. So I think a lot of people, and it's true, you can get started with very basic minimal equipment, just using your laptop microphone, things like that. But if you are a small business that has a brand and that brand has a look and a level of professionalism, right? Your podcast on a basic level needs to also display that professionalism. And I think having a certain level of basic equipment, not necessarily professional equipment, you do not need to spend thousands of dollars to start.
Right.
But having a certain basic level of professional equipment, I think makes just a huge difference that takes away stress. Right? It takes away a lot of stress from the end product.
So the stress, and like it also gives you more confidence in yourself as a podcast host, because you're like, okay, I know that my audio is going to sound good, and that's like 90% of podcasting is good audio, possibly more than 90%. But like you need to have that good audio, because I remember my first microphone, I think I spent like $60 on it, and like bought it off of eBay or something. It wasn't great. It was like a little USB mic, and it was fine. Probably would have been better if I was like eating the mic and like had it up close, but I just,
and that's a big one.
It was that's a big one. It was. So whenever I started this podcast, I had a co-host, and we shared one mic, and we went to a coffee shop, and we just put the microphone in the middle of the table. And then
we might just pause. This is making me sick right now. Hold on.
I know. It was so bad. You could hear conversations on the tables next to us, and like waiters dropping glasses and stuff in the background. And it was just it was terrible for a while. And that was because we went that cheap route of like, we're not making any money from the podcast right now, so we don't want to like invest into it. And and that definitely came across in the audio. I don't think we got a lot of subscribers that first year or so, because it was just it wasn't the best quality. It wasn't a good listening experience, because there are definitely some podcasts that I've listened to that I'm like, what you're saying is great. I just can't listen to it. It hurts to listen.
Absolutely. One of my favorite podcasts in the world right now, 9 times, maybe not 9 out of 10, but 70% of the time I turn it off before the episode's over. Like I love the podcast. I really do. But it's just like production it's just the last thing I think on my mind. So but that's okay. But So maybe some more things that podcasters should be doing.
Sure.
Investing in some equipment from the beginning. Another thing is really consider your recording environment, right? Like,
So don't go to a coffee shop.
no, absolutely. I have some horror stories. I've edited that exact episode basically a dozen times, but I've also had episodes where like the guest is and this is true, was literally doing the dishes while being interviewed,
Oh,
like
okay.
sink running, and dishes clanging for five
Yeah.
six minutes of the episode,
Wow.
like
Wow. Yeah. And then
multiple answers.
all the listeners are just like, why do I have to pee so bad right now? Just
There's
listening
some
to water
subliminal
pour.
messaging happening in that one. So those things are always fun. But yeah, just even being at home, like an office that has a bunch of cabinets and stuff in it is actually better than just a blank room with thing on the walls and a wood floor,
Yes.
and you're just sitting in a desk in the middle. Like that may
Yep.
in theory sound good, but that echo is 70% of my job is removing room echo. Like that's or of my editing.
That was a big deal moving here. So we talked earlier. I don't remember if we were recording yet, but this is a new house. We moved here 4 months ago, and this is a new office. In my old office, had a bunch of like built-in cabinets, carpeted. It was a little bit larger, but it also had like a big window with drapes and a lot of like echo dampening just built into the room. And this one is a smaller room, very tall ceiling, nothing on the walls. Luckily carpet. But like I remember I recorded an episode like the first week that we moved in, still boxes everywhere. We hadn't actually slept here yet. And I came in here and closed the door, and it was just echoing so badly. And I just had to tack blankets to the wall. And 100%. I was like, this is what I'm going to have to do right now. And now I have like the sound panels and all of that. But yeah, it wasn't something that I thought of, because when I had been at the old house for years, it just kind of naturally had that, echo removal built into the room, which was handy. But yeah, definitely something to think about.
Yeah. So, a good thing is like if you do have someone doing your production, get on a FaceTime with them or a Zoom and walk through your house. If you're doing it from home, find a good spot, because, sometimes the closet's a good spot. Sometimes it's a horrible spot. Sometimes the closet's worse than anything.
Right.
But sometimes it is good. And sometimes the living room's fine with carpet and couches and a coffee, maybe, or maybe the kitchen's better. So really just kind of consider your environment before really solidifying where you record your podcast.
Right. You don't want to buy all of the equipment to like set up a whole deal, and then you start recording, you're like, this is not a good spot. This is way too much road noise coming in. Yeah.
And then you batch record 2 months of content that are going to sound not good. So, but I think people are getting a lot more cautious about both of those things, the equipment and the space. So hopefully that's good. But
because I think a lot of people. Oh yeah, I was just gonna say. I think a lot of more people listen to podcasts now than they did even 5 years ago, because like 5 years ago, like you had Serial and you had like some other like true crime stuff, but and maybe the Daily Show or the Daily whatever it is. I think it's just the Daily, but
I think
it wasn't nearly as many podcasts as there are now, and it's just continuing to grow every day, and more people are listening to podcasts. So like as you're listening, like I know that a handful of y'all listeners have DM'd me of like, hey, I'm going to be starting a podcast in the next year, and like you listen to podcasts, this one and others, I'm sure, so you have that idea of like, oh, I need my audio to at least be this level. Like, I don't want people to get 7 out of 10 times just be like, I can't finish this episode, I've got to turn this off. This is bad.
Yeah. Absolutely. You got to kind of put yourself in the audience standpoint. Like, if you are an audience of some podcasts, then consider your experience with those podcasts. Listening to those podcasts, reviewing, or like, we'll get into this, like, how much do you go to their show notes? Do you ever go to an episode and you're like, oh, these show notes only have 3 sentences? I can't listen to it. Like, no, that never happens,
Yeah.
Honestly,
I don't know if I've ever gone to someone's show notes. Like, even as an avid podcast listener, like, I listen to so many podcasts. It is probably unhealthy, the amount that I listen to. But yeah, probably on one hand, I can count the times that I've gone to show notes. And I used to put like a ton of effort into my show notes. And then talking to some of the listeners, I was like, no one really goes there, except for maybe like a couple of links that are important. And I'm like, all right, cool.
Honestly, this is literally my first point under the kind of like don'ts is over focus on the show note and the voice in the show notes. Like, what matters more in the links, right? A link to whatever the advertising, the ad is for your, if you have an ad, that's very important. But then also links to the guest, their social, their product that they're selling, their website, whatever they are. That is way more important than having 3 paragraphs of super branded, your voice has to be written by you. It stresses you out every week to have to sit down and write an hour of show notes for whatever. It is so, I mean, it's one of the biggest stresses that people have. And honestly, it's one of the hardest parts of the production is putting together the show notes for some of my clients that really want some extravagant show notes. And okay, cool, like that's what they want, that's what they're paying me for, but it sometimes takes just as long as like literally editing the hour podcast. That takes a lot of going back and forth. So and for certain shows and industries, maybe the show notes are better or more utilized. For one of my clients, they're in a very niche industry. I mean, it's super niche, but their audience is a little bit older, and we found that they actually really do go to the show notes for this show because when we changed things up, we had a lot of feedback that was like, hey, we liked this mini play-by-play of it because I want to know where I can skip forward to. But it was a little bit of an older audience that wasn't interested in listening to another episode. They wanted the highlight. So
they're like, what can I skip forward to the point that I want to listen to in this podcast, and then not have to like maybe sit through a bunch of banter and all of that.
And that's not the norm. That's not average of most podcast listeners. But just with their niche industry and what they were talking about and everything, it's just that's what their audience kind of wanted. So. But it's not typical, and I really think too many people stress themselves out about their show notes. I was
one of those people.
No, hey, it's the most stressful part I think of the job is writing super branded, perfect sounding show notes every week. For sure.
I used to spend, like you said, I spent more time curating the show notes and writing all the paragraphs and having like all the extra links and all of that in there, and then branding it to the website and like formatting all the images, and it just took so much time, and it was really stressing me out for producing the podcast when this part, the conversation, was what I really enjoyed, and I found so much joy in recording, and then the post-processing, I was just like, there's so many links and so much I have to like now write, that it was taking a lot out of it. And I think that was a great point that you're making, that don't overemphasize the show notes if that's not something that your audience is really invested in.
Yeah. And ask your audience. Like, if you have an audience, ask them, like, hey, how involved in the show notes are you guys? Like, what do you go there? I mean, you know, maybe you get it back and you're like, oh, 2% of my audience actually clicks on it. So why am I spending 30% of my time doing it?
Exactly.
You know. But yeah, so you know, as far as other kind of things to do, really, I think one thing, and it's maybe my kind of like last thing for like dues, but focus in the recording, focus on being more conversational and genuine in the moment. You know, there aren't podcast hosts, you know, that overly disingenuous or anything, but like you're really good at this. Is like, if I say something that's a little bit of a you explore that, you're like, oh, that's cool, like it's actually conversational, instead of like I say 3 cool things in a response and then you're just on to the next question. And
just like okay, cool, and then the next question I have is that was something really that I saw. Okay, well, cool. Well, I'm glad. Yeah, that is, I mean, one of the reasons that I rebranded the podcast to be Wisdom in the Tangents was because that's what I enjoy. And like, I love having conversations about a certain topic, but then like hitting the outskirts of that topic, and sometimes completely, you know, out of left field conversations that come into it. And because it used to be like this podcast used to be the Light and Dark Photography podcast, which was something that I always had to explain what that meant every time that I said it. And Wisdom of the Tangents is like, oh no, I get it. There's probably going to be tangents, and there's wisdom in those.
Hey, and I understand the frustration and the stress of having to explain something like that over and over again. I recently just went through a rebrand of my company, and so my company is called July Media Labs, and July is my middle name, Hayden July Door.
Nice. So were you born in July?
I was, yes, July 24th.
Okay. So, oh, nice. I'm the 13th.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Hey, July birthdays.
I feel like I do. You know, the month does have my name on it, though. So it's technically, my birthday
is technically yours. Yeah.
My name's on it. I can't argue. No.
Yeah.
But no. So before that, I named my business when I was recording death metal bands, and excuse me, I really like the imagery of like Grim Reapers and stuff, and I have a tattoo on the side of my neck. If you can see, it's a scythe, which is what the Grim Reaper holds. It actually kind of is more symbolism for guitar, and I've been a guitar player for years. And growing up, 2 of my favorite guitar players, like their bands and their symbols had like Grim Reapers and scythes on them, and so their guitars had it all over them, and so it's kind of like it's just like a cool symbol that I've always liked, and I've always associated with being like a guitar shredder and like holding like a object that kind of looks like a scythe. And so I named my company Scythe Fight Audio, and first of all, nobody could pronounce it because it's a weird word. Most people don't even know what it is.
Right. Or if you do know what it is, it's like, oh, I've never actually spelled that word before.
Yeah, you've never spelt it. Also, if you're like looking at it, you're like, I'm a podcast. What is this company? And so like I always had to explain to people like, oh, I named it when I was recording bands still, but I focus on podcast production and whatnot. And I built my entire company and business off of that name and with that name. So it obviously didn't matter the most, but the stress of having to explain it was, I hated it.
Yeah.
So
And
at the conference,
just the idea of like how many different people saw Scythe fight,
yeah,
it is a little
yeah,
difficult to say too. And they were
it
just
is.
like,
It's also difficult to
I
say.
don't,
Yeah,
I don't know what this is. I'm just going to move on, and like you never even had the opportunity to explain what it
yeah.
was.
But I was like
Yeah.
20 when I named it, and I thought it was cool, and I was like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
to this gun, like I'm
Yeah.
sticking to it, you know. But
Yeah.
I love the name that I chose now. It's way more just less abrasive, I think. You know, July Media Labs, it utilizes my
Mm-hmm.
name, but it's not my
Yeah.
first and last name, you know, not
Right.
Hayden Door Productions, you know.
Right.
Um, but it really kind of came from the talking to so many different marketing people at the Heart Conference. That was
Mm-hmm.
at the Heart Conference. So many of them were like, "No, just do it. It's so easy to just do it this way. You just gotta try." And um, so yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I
It
get what
does.
you
It
what
does
you're
roll off the
stressed.
tongue
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Yeah.
July Media Labs is way better. So,
Yeah. That sounds great.
but yeah,
But yeah, like that's. I mean, that is a good thing to think about as you're starting a podcast, or maybe you've had a podcast, but you are running into the same thing that I was of just
yes,
like, oh yeah, well the name came from this and this is what it means, but the show is about this,
right,
and having to do that all the time, or not getting the like the SEO clicks from your name itself, or someone just showing up and seeing the name and being like, I don't actually know what this show is about, and I'm not going to spend the time to listen to the episode 0 intro type deal. I'm
right.
just going to move on. So
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
I
It's a
think.
huge thing, and it's the longer it goes on, the harder it gets to do
Mm-hmm.
it. You know, like it's a lot easier to rebrand if you've had 6 episodes than if you've had 600. Like,
Right.
not that it's impossible, but like,
Mm-hmm.
and but it's better to do sooner rather than later. But it's also never
Yes.
too late. So
Yeah.
it's
I
just
I
kind of
think
like
I started thinking about rebranding around episode 80 or so, and then it still took me like another 6 months. So it was like episode like
yeah,
110 somewhere in there that I finally rebranded, and I was like, I
yeah.
should have done this so long ago because this
So
is
yeah.
it's so much better. But yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what's maybe another don't? I love that these like do's and don'ts are kind of like both sided too, where it's like,
Yeah.
do think about your podcast name and don't
Yeah.
just name it because you liked that when you were 20. Uh,
Right.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
As far as more don'ts, we've got, you know, I talk to a lot of small businesses that start podcasts for their business, and I think that is great. I think it's extremely beneficial for small businesses to have
Mm,
podcasts, even with smaller audiences. I think it's still great and important. But something that I see is an expectation on an immediate return on investment. And
yeah,
I tell people, hey, you really, unless you are coming as a established influencer with a big audience, you need to look at it as a marketing leg of your company. So,
mm,
like, it's part of your marketing budget. Like, this is an opportunity for you to connect with your audience, but it's also an opportunity for, honestly, to make business. If there are people in other companies you want to reach, if you want to, whatever your business is, like you want to have a contract with this, or you're interested on what maybe this company does, like, well,
mm,
a good foot in the door is, hey, come on, let's talk on my podcast. Like, obviously that's not like the guest pitch, but like, hey, having
right,
someone on your podcast that you're truly interested in what they do, that shows in the being genuine. And I have clients where it costs them so many hundreds of dollars or whatever per month to run the show with their team and me and everything. Um, but they may not be getting that money back every month, but then they'll sign a contract with somebody that they had on the show and their company, so they made the money
yeah,
back that way. Or maybe they search, or maybe they have conferences, or maybe they maybe you're a photographer that literally just it's a way that not bets and things like that, but you're talking to past clients that you've had. So then future clients can come and listen to your experiences. There's so many ways that a podcast can bring you money indirectly and also directly, but too many people expect a quicker rise in, I don't want to say popularity or success, because you can have a small audience and that's successful.
Oh yeah.
But it really comes down to the immediate return on investment. I tell a lot of people, like, shows don't make money directly. They just they you are getting thousands of downloads an episode consistently. You're not going to make life-changing or full-time money to support the show directly just through advertising.
Yeah.
Like, it's making thousands of dollars on advertising does require numbers. Typically.
Yeah.
So,
you can't be like, well, I had 20 downloads last week, so you're gonna pay me a couple $1,000 or how? Like
exactly.
That's definitely something. I am glad that I didn't have that mindset going into the podcast, because it was more of like a just an elevated client experience for. At the time, I was teaching workshops and doing a lot of like in-person workshops, which I limited to 8 people at a time. And like, this would be a great thing for someone who can't attend the workshop. I can talk about different subjects and then eventually bring on guests, and now mostly just bring on guests. And it's been like kind of like a client elevated experience, which I also have some friends who do wedding photography, but then they have a client-centered podcast where they deep dive into different things that would help them with planning their wedding. And they can be like, oh, I did an episode on that back in episode 7. Go check out this podcast that I do. And like, that is the way that it brings them income, not through advertising, not through like affiliate links and stuff like that, but actually, elevating their client experience, which allows them to then charge more for their services. So there's all sorts of ways you can make money. It doesn't just have to come through advertising.
Right, and so I like to kind of set that expectation. I also like, I like to have people consider their existing audience size. Like, okay, what does your social media like entail? Like, do you have 200 followers, or do you have 1,000, or do you have 10,000 or 100,000? Like, that can matter, but also it can not matter either. Like, you could have 1,000 followers and 750 of them are super involved in your community and in your show, and that can be more valuable than just 5,000 empty listeners who don't click on any affiliate links, who don't purchase anything. Like, there you get 5,000 downloads, but they're not, and that's cool for advertising, but you're not making any investment. Nothing's being reinvested into your company from your audience. And so sometimes having a small, super invested audience can be super beneficial. So it's one of those things. It's not black or white. It is gray. It is totally just up to your audience, up to the show. But there's some good parameters to be mindful of and good things to consider, so you can have a realistic expectation of what running or having a show is going to be like.
I think that's good to come into a podcast with that mindset, instead of the, all right, cool, once I hit 5 episodes, I should be raking in some money and I can quit my day job and all that, which has happened with other people for sure, but it is definitely the exception, because there are a lot of podcasts out there that don't make anything.
Absolutely. And if you don't have an audience, the way that's going to happen is through like aggressive marketing and tons of effort. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't have that audience, then you're gonna and that's your goal, is to have 10,000. Like, that's your goal, is just numbers, and downloads. Then, like, you're gonna have to put a lot of effort in assets. Like, not just 2 clips per episode. No, you're gonna have like 2 clips a day on every platform, viral, and then you're going to burn out trying to grow it inorganically so fast.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
I think that's a great tip. We do have a couple questions from the listeners. Nada asked, what is some basic equipment that's necessary for starting a podcast? You kind of mentioned that earlier, like investing in some good equipment instead of just like recording on your phone. What's some good basic stuff?
I kind of, I don't want to say like swear on microphone, but I think the best bang for your buck is a Shure MV7. It's a USB microphone that can also be used with an XLR cable, so like a regular microphone cable if you were to have more advanced equipment. But it's about $250, and the directional input of it's the brother of this microphone, SM7. It's about twice the cost. So if you have a bit more of a budget, then absolutely this is the microphone to go. But I think starting off, a good microphone, the MV7, Shure, SHURE MV7, that paired with honestly any video that you can put together makes a difference, because as long as the video is decent but the audio is professional, that makes a huge impact on the overall show, because what they hear on Apple Podcast at least sounds great, and then your social media clips look good. They sound good coming from the phone, things like that. So, not that audio is more important, but the balance of it. It's a little bit more affects your audience's experience than video, right? I think it's not more important, but it's a, especially at the beginning, like a good microphone and a $250 investment isn't the worst barrier to entry for this.
No. Oh yeah, for sure.
So I really like. I actually had a sticker on my old laptop case that just broke, that said anything but a Yeti, and I'm sorry, but that that was the sticker that I had. Those are the most marketed microphones in the world for podcasting, but they're very cheap to make, and that's why they're able to sell for $99. I struck doubling the investment or so and getting an MV7. I think it is hundreds of percent the times better than some other more marketed microphones like that. So.
Yeah, like the Yeti, and isn't it like a snow or like a
the snowball
cone? I don't know. Snowball. Yeah. I had a snowball before I started this, long time ago. My dad used to record sermons and just like put them out on the radio, and he had that, and that worked fine, but like those pick up so much background noise.
Absolutely, and it almost works in like just wear your AirPods. Like, just wear AirPods and use those as a mic. Like, I'm using these as just headphones right now.
Right.
Like, I would rather someone use AirPods, the mic, than use a Yeti, personally.
Yeah.
I think it sounds better. So.
Okay. Cool. Well, yeah, I'll have the link for that Shure mic in the show notes too. So anyone who's just like, okay, what was it?
Yeah.
It'll be in the show notes. Y'all can click on that and go.
Yeah. It's usually Amazon Prime too. I've had clients order them same day, so they've gotten them there same day. So. Yeah,
and this is coming out like mid December-ish, so there's usually some good deals before the holidays and all of that. So,
and they do holiday deals on that microphone every year. They usually do a small one, so I absolutely would keep an eye on it.
Okay, cool, good to know. Another listener question is, what do you recommend for editing and like publishing, hosting, all those things?
Yeah. So publishing and hosting, there's actually all the hosting platforms. There's not much difference to them other than their interface and how they look. You know, the big one is Libsyn. That's good. It is great. It has everything you need. Blueberry, great. Has everything you need. Blueberry actually makes submitting your show to like Apple Podcasts and the different ones a little bit easier. So for new shows, I sometimes recommend Blueberry. If they're going to be doing their own hosting, like if I'm not doing it, and if I'm just like maybe consulting or, you know, just doing the editing, I'll tell them maybe Blueberry because it holds your hand a little bit more, not much, but a little bit more. And then you have like Podbean, which is actually really good for beginners. It has a lot of.
That's what I started with.
Yeah, it has a lot of beginner-friendly stuff. Like, so it's honestly like none of them are horrible and none of them are incredible. I've had issues with all of them, and I've had success with all of them. It's just like any piece of software. So it's really just a price point for you.
Yeah, so. Price point, and like with the Podbean, I don't know if it's different now, but whenever I was on there, they had like a cap of how it was either how many megabytes of audio you could put in a month, or a cap of how many downloads people could download. So that might be something to look at.
You have to kind of find like which platform and which plan on these platforms works best. Yeah, because you might, if you do 2-minute episodes, then you don't need maybe a huge plan. But if you do hour-and-a-half episodes, you might have to have one of the more expensive plans simply for that fact.
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah. As far as editing goes, this is a hard one because as an audio engineer, you know, there are things like GarageBand and Audacity, but I don't recommend those for people. They don't make it very easy to podcast together, you know.
Yeah.
So I like, obviously it's me, it's my job too. I think outsourcing editing is a great thing. You can usually starting out, if you have someone taking care of just the editing and you handling everything else, that's a big stress off your shoulders. But I also understand that not everybody can do that starting off. So, you know, depending on your recording platform, let's say you use Riverside, it has some great, you know, what we're using, it has some great there. If you are not an audio engineer and you don't necessarily invest in learning editing, which is a good thing to do, I think, just to have a basic understanding. But if you're not doing that, using like Riverside or using AI programs to do the editing can help and be good, but you're not gonna have the full control. You're not gonna have the full, like, I want it to be exactly like this. They're not as intuitive as they all say, and they don't exactly what they say. You know, like even the other day, I there was like a new AI platform that was like, hey, upload these videos and you get so many clips, and I was like, oh, let me check it out, and I did it, and the clips were horrible. Like they were just like random parts of the podcast. The title made no sense. Like I was like, oh, this is unusable for someone who really wants to specific assets and things to look and sound a certain way. But for if you're just starting out and you have no other choice or option, you can get some really good basic results, especially at the beginning, to get you going. So I've tested out. So Riverside has some AI editing, and I've tested that out, and it's fine. It's okay. Like you said, like if you want that control of what the end result is going to be,
it's not so great. Like they have where it can it cuts up like 10 or 12 reels for you, and that has been cool. But also sometimes it's just like a random part, like mid sentence it starts. I'm like, yeah, but this isn't.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to use this. But usually, like one of the reels is good enough for me to save and publish.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was also that kid with GarageBand who, I would illegally bring in my MP3 files from LimeWire and then like splice together different songs and stuff,
Sure.
and edit out some certain curse words so that I could play it in the car with my parents.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like with that with that background, I felt really comfortable editing myself, which is probably why I haven't outsourced that.
Right.
But yeah, that's definitely a big hurdle for a lot of people who maybe don't have any audio editing background, or just like
there are plenty of resources out there. Like, I mean, you can get a college education on YouTube basically at this point for so many different industries. You can get better than for a lot of different industries. So that's a great place to start. For editing, I use a program called Pro Tools. It's by a company called I use Pro Tools. But it's an industry standard for audio editing. So like, it's what I use to make music and so what you would use if you were literally making the soundtrack to a video game or a Marvel movie. It's a full. So the barrier to entry and the learning curve can be quite intimidating, and I mean, I still learn new things about vocals every day. And I've been using it for 12 years. But they have a free version, and they have basic versions of the software. And I believe they have a free version that is a little bit more tailored to podcasts. And they're a company that has tons of online resources. So if you learn how to do more extensive audio editing, that's a good resource. Really just DAW, which is a digital audio workstation. That's what editing software is. Just to get a more than basic grasp on audio editing, you are absolutely able to do so online today. So
nice.
Yeah,
it is a very different landscape than it was even 5 years ago, trying to figure out
100%.
all this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a great time to start a podcast.
It is.
But one real quick last question from a listener, and then we can kind of wrap this up because I feel like you just like dropped so much good knowledge for us this last hour. But how do you find, or how can you find good guests?
This is a semi-complicated answer, but also not. So I think there are really a few different avenues that you can go through. One, and it's actually one I kind of recommend a lot, is when talking to someone, especially if they are any kind of, I hate using the word influencer, but if they have any kind of audience, or maybe their business has any kind of following, what they do, personal connections are huge. There are so many of the shows that I work for that the host's personal connections are so valuable that they actually handle the guest scheduling, and that's them. I don't, because me sending out emails, even if it's from their company's like email address, doesn't have the same impact reaching out to them asking to be on their podcast. So for a lot of people, it makes sense to have the outreach, personal. But if you don't have that connection standpoint, if you don't have personal connections, most companies that are like guest outreach companies, they're just on LinkedIn. That's all they're doing. Like, they're just going and then like, oh, what industry of people do you want to interview? Cool. Like, well, I'm just going to go to that industry and look through all the CE or so it's nothing that you can't undo. it's a little bit cold cally, right? Like you're going to be sending some cold outreach out there, but utilizing platforms, Instagram and LinkedIn and DMs and directly reaching out, that's a big one.
Oh yeah.
But if you're not able to put in that time of research, of looking up other podcasts that are like yours, like let's say you have a wedding photography podcast, okay, we'll go look at other wedding photography podcasts and who have they had on, and literally just email those people. It's that works. That's what, if you hire someone to do guest outreach, these are the things that they're doing. This is the research that they're doing, is, oh, looking at people in your industry, what other guests are they having on? Cool. I like the 7 out of the 10 of their last guests. I'll email them and whatnot. So, and then also, that is a very valuable thing to outsource. If you're looking to only source a few elements of your show, I think production's a big one, but guest outreach, like to have a consistent recording schedule and not working seasons, and you want weekly interviews and you don't have the time to do the research and the outreach through social media and through finding these people, then it's guest outreach isn't the most expensive thing to outsource. There's people that do it for pretty reasonable prices. So you don't have to go to a big firm for that. Like that is something that you can hire a freelancer for. And a lot of shows that I work for have a person that strictly handles guest outreach. They just do. But the other half of the shows I work for, personal connections are big. Networking, people they talk to in their business, in their life. That has proven, I think, in the shows I've worked on, to be the most valuable in guest outreach, are just utilizing personal connections to begin with. And then that's how you branch off too. Like, your friend who owns this company came on. Okay, well, who do they think might be a good person for you to talk to? Maybe they have a friend. So, it's just like networking in your business. There's no easy way or quick way, really.
Yeah. No, I love, like, personal connections is 100% what I do. I mean, I have every now and then I'll have one of those firms email me and be like, "Hey, do you think this would be a good fit?" 9 times out of 10, it's a no. And I'm like, no, I don't. I don't think it will be. But every now and then I get someone that I'm like, no, that'd be really interesting. And like, I had a psychologist on a few months ago. He was not someone that I followed, but came through a firm, and then we had a great conversation, and it was really beneficial. Like, that kind of stuff. But personal connections, like, a couple of things that I do is I just have a saved folder on Instagram, and people that I think would be fun to talk to. I feel like you have a good knowledge for my audience. I will just save one of their posts to the save folder that I just named guests, and I will go through that every week or so and just, like, interact with their stories, build that personal connection with them, and then eventually reach out and just be like, "Hey, I'm, John, we connected on Instagram, All Art Photography, and, I'd love to have you on the guest or on the show," and that kind of stuff. Or I'll look at their followers and see if they follow any past guests of mine, and then be like, "Oh yeah, I've had Natalie Frank on the show before," and knowing that they know who Natalie Frank is, then they can be like, "Oh, well, if Natalie went on your show, then I trust you. I'll come on your show." Absolutely. And that kind of, like, personal connection, it's just like that LinkedIn type deal where you have, like, first connection, second connection. It's like, we both know this one person, and if they trust that one person, then the odds are they'll probably come on your show if they have time. So, okay. Awesome. Well, sweet. Hayden, this has been a lot of fun. Very, very fun talking about podcasting. This has been a lot of information. So, all of you listeners who've been asking about podcast information, you're welcome. This is Hayden just brought it all today.
We dived in.
But, yeah. But before we wrap up, I want to talk about what we're loving this week. So this could literally be anything: a new book, TV show, music, whatever.
Okay.
What are you loving this week?
Well, I'm not the biggest gamer, like video gamer, but I do have a PS5 and I do like certain games from time to time. And there's a newer Spider-Man game out, Spider-Man 2, for PS5 that I'm pretty, as far as my obsession with video games, isn't a lot, but I'm pretty obsessed with, as far as like I play it a few times a week, which is obsessive for me as far as video games go. And it's a lot of fun. I'm a 32-year-old comic book nerd still. A Hulk coffee cup here. I love comics, Marvel stuff, and so that's how I've been, unwinding lately, is just webbing through New York as Spider-Man, protecting my city. So
yeah, that's great. Is that like like an open world type?
Yeah.
You just like fly it or web through and
you
do
can
different
literally just save little missions. There's like a main storyline and stuff, but it's an open world game, and you're just like webbing around and swinging around New York, and it's like 99% accurate of New York, like all of it, and it's pretty wild. But as far as games go, that's the main one, the one I've been. So
I might have to check that out because that would be fun. I would enjoy that. I had like one of the early Spider-Man games for like PS2 way back in the day.
Legendary, same. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was blocky graphics and all of that, but it was just like so fun to just like fly and then like shoot a web and then like pull yourself and keep going.
That's the main appeal of the game. So
yeah. Okay, well, sweet. Yeah, I'm gonna check that out. Let's see. I am loving this week. I saw a movie recently. I think it's a new one, at least. It was on Prime Video. It's called Knock at the Cabin, like knocking on the door. Knock at the cabin. And it's the cast surprised me a lot because it was it's an interesting plot. I don't want to spoil anything. Yeah, but it's
a great movie. Great movie.
Yeah,
I loved it.
I really enjoyed it. Dave Bautista in a very different role than he normally is.
He's an underrated dramatic actor. He's an underrated.
He really is.
He surprisingly had a very big range of emotion in that movie.
Yes,
I thought it was great.
Yeah. But Dave Bautista and Rupert Grint in a very different role for him as well. And then Jonathan Groff. Who I know from one Frozen because he's Sven in Frozen with my kids, but also he was King George in Hamilton. On Broadway. But it was an interesting movie. I thought that the plot was good and like the way that it ended was interesting. So
it that was off. It was worth it. It was worth it.
It did. Yeah. Sometimes those kind of movies are just like, all right, well, that was an hour and a half. But this one was really good. I enjoyed it a lot. Okay, well, sweet. Well, Hayden, where can people find you online? Where can they follow along and chat with you about podcasting and all that?
Yeah, so my social media is at July Media Labs, or you could just look for Hayden July. That's how I have my name on social media, just because it makes it easy with the name. And then my website right now is being built. It will be finished before this goes live. So by the time this goes live, you can absolutely go to JulyMediaLabs.com. Just needed kind of a full from the ground up with the rebranding and implementing new features online, everything through the site. So so July Media Labs, Hayden July. Let's talk about podcasting. I love to jump on calls, and I'll jump on a call with you for an hour and a half, and we'll talk about your show. So,
nice.
Love doing that. So, yeah.
Well, sweet. I will have. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed this, and I know you brought like a lot of really great knowledge, like insider knowledge, for those interested in starting a podcast or growing their podcast.
Sure, so, absolutely. Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you. No, this has been great, and thank you again.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, Facebook, YouTube, thanks for joining in today. It was good to have y'all here, and I'll see you next week for another episode.